Well, 2022 is a brand new year, and with it, we're supposed to make brand new decisions, right? And if you are one of those people considering moving abroad, living in a completely different culture, well, and you're wondering what it takes to settle in with ease or even absorb the new language from your new home, you've come to the right place, because I know the one person, Andrea Hand, who can tell you straight from the horse's mouth what it takes to be able to speak 5 languages and 5 global major languages fluently, and also settle in a completely foreign culture, completely in a place that is completely and absolutely alien to you, and still thrive. So I do hope you enjoy this conversation, because it's got lots and lots and lots of information for you. Fantastic. So anyway, shall we start then?
Yes.
Okay, so Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today on So You Want to Know.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. And there's a lot of stuff we want to know about your life as an expatriate. I mean, it's not easy, as it seems, to adapt life living abroad, but you've always made it seem so effortless. What is it like transitioning life in a foreign country every time you move?
Well, I don't know how effortless I make it seem. I mean, definitely, it's coming with its challenges. I've lived, it's a total of 6 or 7 different countries, either for school or work. And I've definitely, it's been a learning process. Like the first time I moved to Mexico, I was 20. And the way that I approach moving abroad now is a bit different, obviously, just because of logistical stuff. So, it depends. Because every country has its own positive things and things that are challenging. And I think it's always about kind of learning your own resilience and adaptability to whatever, culture or a different country or rules and regulations that you encounter.
Great. You've lived in China. That's how we met. That's
Yes.
how we know
Yeah.
each other. So you've lived in China. You are from North America. You've lived in, I think, Mexico as well, and now you're in Germany. Plus, I think there's some other place that I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Mexico for 2 years. I also, I did volunteer work in London, actually, in Kent and Bromley South. And so I was doing volunteer work there. That was when I was around 20. And then during my studies in my university, Spanish and Italian were my minors. So I also lived in Argentina, and then I also studied in Rome several times. So, yep.
Wow,
And
how
then now
many
Germany.
languages do you speak actually? Because those are so many different places with so many languages to keep up with as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a challenge. I speak English and Spanish fluently, but then my Italian has gotten a little bit less in the last couple of years, because I find that languages are kind of little radio dials. So when one gets more for me and I get better at German, then my Italian kind of suffers. And when I go up in Italian or Chinese, then my German gets worse. So at the moment, I would say English and Spanish, still Italian. German, I'm still working on. I've been here for 9 years, and German is a very challenging language for me, just because it's very detail oriented. And I think what I liked about Chinese was, the grammar in Chinese is fantastic. It can be a difficult language for a lot of people to start because of the tones and, having to listen. And obviously the writing is challenging for a lot of people. But you don't have the articles and you don't have the tenses in Chinese. And so German, because of its detail orientation, is a little bit challenging for me. So I would say up to 5, but at different levels.
Okay. So with languages, I think you are blessed, because I lived in China for 12 years, and I think you were there for less time than I was, but then your Chinese was much, much better. Do you still keep up with it though? Or
I
how do you
have
keep up with language, making sure that even though you're losing out, you're not actually forgetting it completely?
Well, I have to say, during lockdown, it was kind of challenging to maintain everything. But usually, I use italki or, online tutoring services, just where you can book a session for an hour and just talk to somebody. That's been the best way for me, because I think sometimes with a busy work schedule, it's hard to get that, time to go to a class or whatever. But I think one of the only, one of the few benefits of the pandemic and lockdown is that all these things became available online. So it became much easier to schedule a session with somebody in China or Italy or, Spain or whatever, to keep up your languages. Even with my German, I have one teacher who is a German guy who lives in Vietnam. So it's, it's the positive result of globalization that we have access to the internet and people all over the world. But it is definitely a challenge. I mean, because it's, I wish it were as easy as just learning the language and then like it's there and it's stuck in your brain. But unfortunately, that's not how it goes at all, because I find that like the first thing that you end up losing is vocabulary. And so you end up learning ways to describe things that you want, but you don't remember the exact word until somebody says it. You're like, oh yes, of course. I knew exactly what that was.
But how did you end up with your German teacher living in Vietnam? I mean, this is quite fascinating. You are in the heart of Germany, surrounded by so many German people, but why just this particular person who's, a different time zone, who's, across the oceans?
Well, because it was a bit cheaper than it was a bit more affordable, honestly, than some of the teachers that were here. I mean, I do German online classes here as well, but sometimes, I mean, of course, when you're in a group setting, you don't get to talk quite as much. And I really need to pay somebody to be patient with me, listen to me try to express myself, to get the proper like pronunciation and correct my grammar errors and everything like that. And for me, one-on-one has always been better. Like when I was in Beijing, I had a woman who came to my house twice a week. And that was how I kept up my Chinese during that time. Also, I find in China, it's very easy to just, be chatty with people. They're always interested to talk to foreigners, And with Spanish, it's much easier, obviously, because like, no matter where you go in the world, I mean, there's 23 countries that speak Spanish. So the likelihood of you bumping into somebody who speaks Spanish is higher after all.
All right. So of all these languages you speak, which one would you reckon is the easiest to learn and maintain it?
Spanish.
But obviously English is your mother tongue, but outside of English now.
I would say Spanish actually, because it's not that it's an easy language, but it's easier, I think, to pick up. Like I know a lot of people, for example, who went to South America for a year, didn't take any classes, but just through kind of talking to people. And I also feel like Spanish speakers are quite patient when it comes to trying to teach you things and listen to you. And it's a language where you can make mistakes that are forgivable and people still understand you. Whereas like sometimes I mean, with Chinese, obviously with the tones, like if you say something wrong, nobody knows what you're talking about. Sometimes people who are with foreigners a lot, they can just kind of generally guess the context of what you're talking about. But I mean, I remember being in a taxi one time in Juji when I first moved there, and I had like my backpack and I was going for a weekend trip, and I was trying to say like train station, and I was just like teacher Jan, and he was like, huh? I'm like teacher Jan. He's like, and I was like, teacher Jan, and he's like, no. And then finally I was just like chugga 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 choo choo, and he's just like, oh, teacher Jan, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's what I said.
Yeah.
So I mean, with Chinese, I mean, the tones can really mess you up, but I think that if you're for people that are trying to pick up a second language, Spanish is a really good one, because you can pick it up easier, I think, just by being around Spanish speakers and listening and practicing with them when you can.
Okay, now describe to me what it means to be an expatriate, because I think you consider yourself a serial expatriate.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, I guess just somebody who's able to make a new life in another country. And I mean, without some sense of permanence necessarily there. But then, of course, there are times where people go to move to some place like Spain, and then they end up, falling in love with it and staying forever. So for me, I guess I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. And like, I mean, I love Minnesota and everything like that, but it was a bit too cold. And I always liked the idea of being in another place, around new people, around, different cultures and foods and histories and everything like that. So for me, that's what always kind of drew me out of the US and kind of into other countries.
Do people back home think you're a little bit crazy, because you can't just keep on moving and moving and moving and moving? I mean, when does it stop?
But I mean, I'm stopped for now. Like at the moment, I mean, I'm in Germany. I've been here for 9 years. This is the longest that I've ever been in another country. And I think, I mean, I'll probably stay here for I don't know, the foreseeable future. I mean, when I get older, I kind of want to be someplace maybe a bit warmer, because sometimes in Germany it's a bit difficult in the winter because it's just so dark and cold. But luckily, I mean, where I am in Munich, it's really easy to, go to Italy or Spain, or, take a flight to Greece in a few hours. So that's convenient. But definitely, I think um, probably when I get older, I'll move someplace warmer, maybe by the sea.
Yeah. Okay, sounds interesting. So now you've settled in and have acculturated yourself in your new environment. How then do you, as an expatriate, psychologically adapt to especially the challenges and setbacks that, sometimes life throws at you, especially because for you are oceans away from your family members and friends.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, because I think this year with COVID especially was a very different circumstance, because we weren't able to kind of go home. And so that was one of the definite harder things as an expat that I've experienced, because I think normally the more that you kind of move to other countries, you just kind of learn the process of setting yourself up, about, going to meetup groups, about doing activities, getting to know people, doing language classes. And so I think that that's always the first step, in moving someplace. Obviously, you have all the logistical complications that arise no matter where you are. In certain countries, it's much more difficult than others. Germany is very, very difficult to do a lot of things, just because of the way that the bureaucratic system works. But I think the first thing is always trying to create like a little social support group for yourself, just so that you can also, through learning the language, that you can meet people, that you can make friends from that country. I mean, obviously, if you're working, it's also really helpful to have colleagues, that are from that country, that can also kind of give you advice. And expat groups have always been really, really important for me, because I mean, not only do you have the benefit of meeting all of these people from all over the world, like Beijing. I mean, you really realize how similar we are at the end of the day, especially when you're in a place like China, where you can feel very alone. Like as a foreigner, sometimes it does feel very isolating. But through meeting expats from other places, you learn to kind of, to have that social support system that you need, because you're so far away from your family. But I mean, to answer your question, yes, my family and friends from Minnesota probably think I'm, kind of crazy for living in all these different places. I remember when I first moved to Mexico, like, I don't think anybody really believed me until I actually left. And then I think that they always assumed I would move back. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Georgia. Now I'm going to go to, South America, and then China. And that was when they really thought I had lost my mind. Obviously, because everybody, I mean, as a kid, I studied Chinese, so it wasn't such a weird thing for my parents, because as a kid, I always liked Chinese culture. I was studying Chinese. I went to Chinese camp as a teenager and stuff like that. But I think that they didn't understand, or they didn't expect me to stay that long, But I mean, I think the situation in China was such that, with the global financial crisis, a lot of people who thought maybe they would, I don't know, go back to Europe or, the Americas or something, ended up staying in China. Because I remember my dad telling me, Andrea, there's no work in the United States right now. If you have a job in China, you might as well just stay there. And I think a lot of people did that. Like, I'm not sure about you, but I know that many people were like, you know what? The job market is good in China. They still need, foreign professionals. So I'll just hang out here. And then that turned into 7 years, of course. So
I mean, and I'm sure even at that 7 year mark, you were still, not sure whether you wanted to leave. Because I think for me, it was every year. I used to go through that thought process of, I'm going to leave next year. I'm going to leave next year. And so 12 years later.
yeah.
But anyway, so how would you describe being an expat, obviously in China and elsewhere you've lived? Because I'm assuming it must be very, very different. In China, it's just very, very obvious, and they treat
Yeah.
you as such.
You mean like, how does China compare as an expat in comparison to other places?
Hmm.
I guess it's strange, because on one hand, I mean, yes, it is really, really different in China, but I find that Chinese people are so incredibly helpful with foreigners, helping you go to get registered with the police at the police station, for example, when you move into a new flat. And it's a very communal society. So they're always inviting you for dinners and inviting you to do things. And I feel that they're very helpful, just really helpful. And I can remember certain times where I was supposed to meet a friend, and they were like on the other end of the plaza. I didn't know. And so I would just ask some Chinese person, I'm like, sorry, can you tell my friend, please, where I am? Or, you pass your phone to the taxi driver and things like that. I don't feel like they would really happen other places. They'd be like, okay, you deal with it on your own. But Chinese people are incredibly helpful like that. So I feel that for me, the first year I was in China, that was definitely, that was in Juji. And so I did find it very, very isolating because I didn't have, any other foreigners around me for the first few months. And it was a very small town of a million people, but still it felt very isolating at the beginning, like until I kind of got some friends. And then I also made some Chinese friends in the city. So we would hang out with my foreign friends. And so that really changed everything for me. But it was very isolating. Whereas, for example, in Germany, I was able to go to different expat groups, and obviously joining German class, you meet a lot of other people there who are also trying to settle in.
Mhm.
And when I was in Argentina, I met people quite easily. And I also, I had a living situation where there was some Colombians there. And so there were always people to speak Spanish with. And so the language barrier wasn't an issue. And I think that's why it was quite easy. But the easiest, I have to say, is Mexico, because Mexico, they're so welcoming and warm and including. Like I moved there, and I had like one friend from when I had moved there, had gone for a study program before. But so my Spanish teacher was like, hey, Axel, one of the guys who was at the university, he's like, okay, this is Andrea, please take care of her. She's new. She doesn't know anybody. I was the only, American in my whole university of Mexicans, and they all made me feel so welcome. Like that evening, they were like, oh, we're going to go for dinner and then maybe to a bar afterwards. Would you like to come? I was like, yes, I would love to come to dinner with you and out to a bar. Thank you so much. And so, I just had friends suddenly, and so that's definitely much easier. And in Germany, it takes more of an effort because it's in general, Germans are not quite as open to meeting new people. But once you've kind of gotten to know them and earned their trust, they're like the most loyal, amazing friends ever who will do anything for you. But until you kind of get to know them, sometimes it can be a bit challenging. So it can be a little isolating at the very beginning in Germany, especially when you don't speak German.
Mm-hmm. Now, one more question about China. Do you think a lot of people, when they say that once you've lived in China, it's easier to get acculturated or to live anywhere else in the world? Do you subscribe to that belief?
Culturally, yeah, maybe. Only in the cultural sense, because I think there are a lot of things in China that obviously, if you're from the West, you just don't understand it, and so I think moving to anywhere in Europe, for example, it was like, okay, that's easy. It's Western culture. Of course, not to say that, the European countries are obviously very different, but it's still a Western, cultural society. And so I find that it's not as, so yeah, maybe everything after China is a little bit easier, But I also, it's funny because I met, like an American girl who moved to Canada, and it was just like, wow, that was really different. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, so for me, of course, Canada and the US are different, but if you compare those two versus living in China versus Germany or something like that, it's obviously very different.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, when people crisscross cultures like you have many times, your food palette tends to sort of fluctuate. What's your relationship with food each time you have to go to places? Do you just dive in, like you arrive in a country completely different and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to go into a local, restaurant, and you're not very fussy about things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every country that I've lived in, I've really liked the food. I think in general, living in China made me way more open to trying new things than I was. I used to be a little bit more of a picky eater. Plus, I lived in Italy and Mexico, and there wasn't anything that was so out of the ordinary. And in China, you end up going to all of these banquet dinners and stuff. And so I was just like, you know what? I'm going to try it. My rule is I'm going to try everything. If I don't like it, I don't have to eat it. Plus, I think also you tend to be in situations where, you know, you're with a family maybe, and they've cooked something for you, and it might be something that you're not sure if you're going to like, but you're kind of in the situation where you have to try it because it would also be rude. And so that's one of the things that culturally, you know, I don't want to offend somebody by not trying the food that they've made for me, you know. And so I got much more open-minded. In Germany, I mean, I think after living in Asia though, and Mexico, I think that I do have like a palate. I like intense flavors. So that's one of the differences with, you know, German food is it tends to be a bit bland if you compare it to Asian spices, and especially, you know, Chinese spices. But and so that's one thing I miss Chinese food. Like Chinese food is one of my favorite cuisines in the world. But I mean, here in Munich, I mean, I still go out for like Afghan food or Persian food, or, you know, they do have some Thai restaurants and stuff. But yeah, I think my palate has changed in the sense that I like more strong flavors. Whereas when I was, you know, 19 before I moved to Mexico, I used to just eat things like, you know, rice with cheese on it, or something like very, you know, bland, because I also was a teenager then. So I hadn't explored the world yet, and I didn't know about, you know, other cuisines or better food, you know.
Right. That I agree with you because right now, I mean, since I've moved from China, I find myself thinking quite a lot about Chinese food, and at least once or twice a week, I've got to get some duck in there, some, you know, some huo guo in there, and I've
Yeah.
discovered some really nice, you know, Chinese brands that are here in London. Although, my goodness, you pay it through the nose. However, it's, you know, a treat that I give to myself once in a while.
Hmm.
Well, yeah. So and identity is such a significant aspect that many expats struggle with, or people who've, you know,
Mm.
lived their lives moving quite a lot across cultures. Um, when people, I mean, do you find yourself asking yourself these questions about who am I, where am I from actually, where is home?
Mm.
Have you ever experienced this, and how often does this happen?
That's an interesting question. I mean, because I mean, at the end of the day, my passport is American, and I definitely feel that I have some, I don't know, maybe like aspects of humor and stuff like that, but I don't feel that my identity is tied to my passport or being American. But having said that, you know, would I want to get another passport? Probably not, because it's still a piece of who I am. But yet, my identity is based on the portions of my life that I have spent in different countries. So, like, I would say that honestly, before I moved to Mexico, I really was a completely different person. And that experience changed my life completely for the better. I mean, it was very difficult. I mean, I moved to Mexico when I was 20 by myself. This was like before internet stuff, you know, so I hadn't done a lot of research on where I was going. I read a pamphlet, and I remember sitting down the first night, you know, like I was at this guest house, couldn't speak any Spanish, and the father like showed me to my room and was like, okay, see you in the morning, you know. And I sat there and I just like, I cried on my bed. I was like, oh my God, like, what have I done? I'm either super courageous and brave, or I am a total idiot, you know. And I was just, you know, questioning myself and everything. And that that fear like was very real, but that, you know, led to one of the biggest changes in me as a person in terms of how I saw the world, how I saw myself, what I realized that I was capable of, you know. And it was the best experience that, you know, I could have ever done in my life. And the second one was moving to China, because that was also, you know, China is a very challenge. It can be a very challenging place, you know, to start. And I think while I never, you know, I never had the feeling, okay, I'm Chinese or something like that. Those years in China definitely formed me as a person, you know, during my 30s, probably more than any experience that I had. You know, Mexico was kind of the catalyst, but China, in terms of everything, like how I see cultures and people, and um, how I understand globalization, and how I understand how the world works, and how I understand politics, and how I understand, I don't know, business, and just everything in life. That experience was completely transformative for me in
Hmm.
a very positive way.
Good. Now, I've had things like, if you're a serial expat, you might have an addiction problem. And one of the major things that people tend to mean in this case is usually like it's very easy for you to get trapped or to get into
let's say, become an alcoholic, because that's all
Mm,
what expats end up doing when they move to a different country. Do you believe this is true? Do you think there is some truth in there?
I think, well, so that's an interesting question too, because there is some sense, or can be some sense of escape that is tied to sometimes to expat life, you know, of just kind of running and reestablishing yourself in another place. I think that that definitely changed for me as I got older, though. I mean, I'm 43 now. So, like, when I made the decision, I think I was 36 to move to Germany, it was like, I'm going to stop moving. I'm going to go and establish my life someplace and I'm going to stay there. And so, but I mean, yeah, I think definitely there was maybe part of it in my younger years that was, it was tied also to a sense of exploration and also finding myself. But maybe part of it was also a little bit of escapism, like I don't know what I'm looking for, but I have to just keep going until I figure it out, you know. But I think that that's not necessarily tied to expat life, but also to age and growth, you know, as a person as well. And people do that in very different ways, you know. And for expats, I think that's just kind of one of the outlets, you know,
Mm.
that we use is, okay, I
Mm.
don't like where I am. I'm going to go start over somewhere else and, you know, see how it goes. And I don't know, it's not right or wrong. It's just different. It's a
Right.
different way of doing things. Some people, you know, I mean, in their own countries, throw themselves into other things that are, you know, part of their growth process, I guess.
True. Now, what is the key to expat success? Obviously, I think you are one of the people I know who has been very successful in terms of moving around. What are some of your tips you can give to people to help them adapt and settle in seamlessly into an expat lifestyle, if you like?
In terms of settling in, so there's like two components to this. One, I would say in terms of settling in, the other one kind of maintaining, you know, whatever life that you've built for yourself. Because I think with settling in, like I said, the first thing that I think everybody needs to do, which I kind of should have done differently, like in my younger years that I've learned, is really, really research the place that you're going and get on the forums, get in the Facebook groups, you know, make sure that learning the language is the top priority at the beginning, and make sure that you can set up a social circle for yourself, because that will also make all of the other challenges that come along with expat life a little bit more bearable. And of course, you know, I think sometimes there's a misconception that like expat life is easier somehow because you are exploring all these new things, and it's not. It's just different, you know, because you have other challenges that maybe if you were in your own country and you could just call the phone company, you know, when your internet goes out or something like that, and seamlessly fix it or something, you know, it's a different kind of problem. But I would say that in terms of the beginning, make sure you research, figure out things like taxes and all of the legalities, because I also know a lot of people, especially from the States, who didn't realize they were supposed to pay taxes in the US while they live abroad. That can be very expensive if you if the IRS, you know, decides that you need to pay back taxes. So those logistical questions, I think, are easy to overlook at the beginning. And I think one of the main things is having a financial cushion at the beginning, because sometimes, you know, especially with people that I coach, you know, they move for a job and that job is tied to their visa and also like, you know, an apartment or something like that. And then maybe the job doesn't work out for whatever reason. Maybe they don't like it, or maybe they don't pass the probation period. And so suddenly they don't have anything, you know, and they don't have a visa, maybe they don't have a place to live, and they don't have enough money, you know, as a fallback. So I always think that that's one of the main things, is like get enough money saved first before you leave if you can. And then in terms of maintaining, I think it's also a sense of patience and adaptability and resilience, because I find that things can really change so quickly, like as an expat. And of course, you know, everybody has a different story. For some people, this is not the case. For me, especially in China, you know, there could be a new law that affects your visa tomorrow, and suddenly you have to go to Hong Kong tonight, you know, or they might decide that in your apartment that they don't want foreigners anymore, for example, or or that they, I mean, this happened to my roommate. My roommate was French, and there was there was a conflict between what the French prime minister said or something like that. And China decided, okay, French people don't get visa extensions like this week. Okay. So it's kind of one of those things that you have to constantly be trying to be adaptable and resilient. And even, I mean, in Germany, I think certain processes that I took for granted, you know, like in the US, and of course, every country has positive and negative things, right? So, but in the US, it can be very efficient. Like if you just want a tax number, you need like a business number. And in Germany, this took me 6 months to get a tax number for my business. And so I just remember being like, I don't understand, you know? And so it's that sense of, okay, if it's something that I can't do anything about, you know, I need to figure out a way to manage it without completely stressing myself out about it, you know? And so I think also, you know, being able to ask for help from people, you know, whether it's just paying somebody, you know, like a tax advisor or something to help sort it for you, and realizing that you don't have to manage everything alone, you know, because there are so many things that as an expat, you're not familiar with the process and you do it 100 times your way and you just don't understand why it's not working. And then you talk to somebody and it's a German person, they're like, oh yeah, no, you can't do it like that. That's not going to get you anywhere. And you're like, oh, okay. If I had asked somebody at the beginning, I could have saved myself, you know, a lot of trouble. So I think that's a big one, like asking for help, being resilient, being patient and adaptive.
That's a
and
big
not
one.
having,
Yeah, that's a fantastic advice, Andrea. Now, finally, I know you did mention earlier that you, in the future, when you perhaps get to that retirement age, you might consider moving to some other place that's much warmer. But have you also thought maybe going back to America might be your plan B, or repatriation is just a no-no for you at this point?
I don't think so. I mean, my idea has always been to fully like have my business remote so that I can go to the US for like 3 months out of the year, spend time with my parents, and then be able to go someplace else if I want to. But I don't see myself living in the United States long term. I mean, this is me now. This could always change, but I really always wanted to live in Europe, and I love the cultures here. I love the food. I love the people. I think Europe has a really fascinating history, and so I can see myself more staying here in the long term.
Fantastic. Okay, Andrea, thank you again so much for joining us today. Well, joining me today. And obviously, I'm really looking forward to talking to you again, because you did mention something about job coaching, and I'm pretty sure that this is a topic I've always wanted to handle at some point. So I will try and catch you at another time, because I know you're a very busy woman.
Yeah, sure. I do transformational life coaching for expats. So it's like whether they're trying to move from someplace, you know, to another country, or once they're trying to get set up, that kind of support that they need.
Well, thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because we are always looking for that extra support from you. Look out for more videos coming up this month and throughout the year, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it. Please don't forget to leave your comments down below, because it is from your comments that I get to know what kind of videos you want me to be able to do more, and with videos that are more helpful to you. Otherwise, be happy, and happy new year 2022. I hope you're successful and all your dreams this year come true.